Well, hello there. We're down to the final episode in this series that I call Woman of Power. I start this lecture with an old Eastern philosophy that I heard of many years ago, and it stayed in the back of my mind as a good principle. It somehow made sense, and it goes something like this. It says, long before our souls manifest into the physical, it made some very deliberate choices as to where it wants to be born, to whom it wants to be born. So it selects very carefully its parents, its era, the country, even the siblings it wants to be born into. So, because it knows instinctively, it knows that it's only within a certain set of circumstances, within a certain family structure, it can actually learn the lessons that it came here to learn. Now, isn't that wonderful? Now, that isn't everybody cup of tea. Not everybody believes that. But it sort of has this ring of truth to it. So I want you to pause for a minute, your skepticism, and go with me on this ride. And together, let's just assume for a second that that might be true. Then it's no wonder that I was born to the woman, Crusita Sennon, my mother, 60-something years ago. Yes? And I think of her often because she was that guiding light, that North Star, that even though I wasn't conscious at the time, a lot of my day-to-day decisions came from her teachings, from her belief, from her practices. So I want you to meet Crusita. Crusita was a strong, no-nonsense kind of mother. Very soft, very caring, very considerate, very understanding, even more than most parents. But at the same time, you couldn't cross her. But Crusita's life wasn't that in the beginning. So Crusita lost both parents at a very early age. So she went from family member to friend of family member. And that's how she got circulated in her community as a young child. Perhaps from about 8 years old, she was being shuffled from one situation to the next. You know how it is. So she ended up at a young age, she hooked up with a guy who was very abusive, physically, emotionally, mentally abusive. And she, although he was very abusive, she managed to stay through 4 pregnancies. And things just got worse as the years went by. So she knew instinctively that she had to get out, but she didn't know how. How would she get out? Think about it. Think of her circumstances at the time that I'm talking about, 40, 60 years ago, or however, actually maybe longer, because my brothers are that much older. Think of her situation. She had no money, no bank account. She had no career, no job, no dreams of a career. She had nobody to rely on, per se, because all her immediate family was in perhaps the same poverty that she found herself. So, could you imagine how terrifying that is? Now, nowadays, if you find yourself abused and you had to leave the home, you have services all over the place to help support battered women, blah, 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 you know. But she didn't have that. She didn't have access to none of that. But she had something else. In her heart, she had something else worth protecting, which was 4 beautiful kids that she knew that there was no way in hell she wanted to expose them to that level of abuse and dysfunction. Because the guy that she was with, he was abusive, not just to mommy, he was just abusive. I remember some of the stories of abuse that went on. And of course, she got the worst. But what did she do? She decided to jump ship. What got her to that point, though? Although she never spoke a lot or openly about the actual day-to-day abuse, I remember as a child sitting around listening to some of her stories, and she finally spoke about what it was like the night before she jumped ship. She remembered being beaten so badly that she had to grab the kids and run out of the house. And there was no way she could have gone back in the house because the husband was raving mad by at the very fact that she got away this time. So she ended up having to sleep in a drain, in a public drain with public water running through. Just imagine this, what that must have done to her psyche. I mean, just listening to my mother having to experience that, even though I didn't live it, it sounded like a real nightmare. She described standing in the water with one baby in an arm and holding up another baby, another kid from drowning, while my oldest brother was tall enough and strong enough to hold on to the third child. That was the moment she said, enough, enough. I can't do this anymore. So she took a leap of faith and walked away from that relationship, not knowing what is going to happen next. That's the woman I was born to. And she taught me some really important lessons. And I would say, because of her experience and who she was, she had a sort of tainted slight towards teaching women how to survive. So I grew up in a household of 8 sisters. There were 3 boys from my mother. My mother had 12 kids, 3 boys, and the rest of us were girls. So she had a playground to teach women how to survive, no matter what circumstances they find themselves. Right? So she followed me through my years of independence or adulthood, always in the back of my mind, tweaking why I think, what I'm going to do next, what would Crusita say? Here are some things Crusita would say. Crusita had a famous saying, when your hand is in the lion's mouth, as a woman, sometimes you have to remove your hand from the lion's mouth and not wake him up. Because waking him up may mean you get your hand bitten off. My decision to leave my relationship when I did and how I did was a direct lineage to how Crusita would think. You don't have to rile him up and threaten to leave and all of that good stuff. While you're planning to leave, start to put some markers in place, some building blocks, some stepping stone. You see, when you find yourself in a dysfunctional relationship, a lot of us can't. We're crippled, we're frozen in place. Because if it's not the kids, it's the finances, it's the family, it's the religion, it's the neighborhood, and what they would say, what people would say. Crusita didn't think of in those way in that structure. But what she would say is, start putting little building blocks in place while you're thinking through your big master plan, whether that's an exit or whatever. And what does an exit plan look like? Well, just as a little example. For example, a lot of us are frozen in relationships that we can't leave. He pays the bill, he pays most of the bill, he's the breadwinner, and we don't see a possibility of how we're going to survive, how we're going to support ourselves and our kids, or whatever that we need to now face. She would say, find something to do. Doesn't matter. Now, in those days, she couldn't find, let's say, a computer class, right? But what she could do was plant a kitchen garden and sell the extra, or use the produce to supplement the family's food. So that's one less expense she had. Now, we're talking about a different age. And in a way, there's so much more that you can do, regardless of age, regardless of status, regardless of education. All you need is a laptop and some training that could take you from no hope to having just a little bit more in your bank account. And that little bit more means a little more independence, because it's getting you to the point where you can now handle your business, as we say, right? So, when your hand is in the lion's mouth, number one, remove it and try not to get it bitten off. So whatever plan or strategy you're putting in place, keep it quiet, keep it to yourself. Only tell those that need to know, right? She would say, prepare to be independent. So from the time we were little girls, she acted as if we'd never have a husband or family support, because she drummed in our little brain how important, how critical it was to be able to take care of yourself and your kid, just in case. And I mean, just in case he drops dead. That's a possibility. Or just in case he wakes up and decide he no longer fit into your life, like I did, like I had done to me. See? Now, without the foundation, the financial foundation, I would have been crawling on the ground. I would have been traumatized to the point where I couldn't recover. I couldn't be standing in front of you talking about empowerment. No. I was able to get off the mat because I put in place little blocks along the way, or little breadcrumb like Hansel and Gretel there, right? So you just have to be prepared for the unexpected and be able to rise up and function within that unexpected scenario, which you may know or may just be slapped on you, like if somebody drops dead, as I said, but you still have to prepare, right? She would say, do unto others as you would have them do for you. And just as an example, my ex, after he left and went his way with such pomp and circumstance, he would call me looking to have conversation, any old hour of the night. And I would say to him, look, do me a favor, don't call me. Because this is the same thing that I resented you for. Calling your woman on the couch while my foot is on your foot. In the middle of the night. When I'm asleep or gone to bed, he's whispering now out in the couch. So the same thing that irritated and created such resentment for me, I don't want that for anybody else. So I told him, under no circumstances are you invited into my house once it gets dark. As a matter of fact, don't even call me, right? Because your wife or your significant other wouldn't like it. She wouldn't appreciate it. She wants to be safe now. What she and him was able to do with me, or not with me, I'm sorry, I'm digressing there. But what they were able to do for each other, I don't want that even for them. So that would be my mother's framework. Do unto others. And it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing bad is going to happen to you or no shit is going to happen to you. But what it means is, though, you get to stand in integrity, regardless of what somebody else do or don't do to you, right? And that's like the most critical thing in my Crusita's Bible there is finally to be standing in integrity of who you say you are, who you profess to be, right? Regardless of what somebody else does. She would push us through no matter what we wanted to do. She would say, you're capable, you're able. The age had no boundaries for her. My mother got sent, she chose to go back to Trinidad after the devastating news that she had a heart condition and she didn't have long to live. She was in her 60s when she heard that. My mom turned around, went to Trinidad, and actually had a thriving business when she was supposed to be lying down waiting at death's door. She lasted till she was 92 or something like that. Just keep going. She never stopped. She never stopped creating. She never stopped reinventing herself. one of the things I remember a lot about my mom that really stayed with me, in her last few years, I would go to Trinidad a lot more often to visit with her. And the funny thing would be, every single day, she would have people coming in and out of the house. Not to take advantage of her or anything. It would be like, what can I do for you today? Can I help you? What do you need out on the road? What do you need in the grocery? And then she would sit down with these people and have these long philosophical discussions. And they would go on for hours. And I would be like, isn't this a lady that was supposed to die 30 years ago? No, because she constantly stayed engaged and alive. What she also did, though, she was particularly sensitive to the underdog. At least the people we, as a society in the area that we grew up, always looked down on or saw as less fortunate or didn't meet our social status. Not my mom. She would engage them, she would bring them into her world, and whatever was good for her was good for them. So she would feed them, and she never would say, well, this is just so and so, so they can't get the same food that I'm eating. She would actually take out for them first, make sure their belly's full, and then she would feed herself. You know, she was a very, very kind and generous person. She was very non-judgmental, and she fed the underdog. So, you know, I'm standing here thinking, right? My mom believed in honesty. She would say, no matter what the consequences of your action is, you still need to stand in it. Whatever the consequences, you still need to stand in it. And I guess that's why, through my many years of living in a dysfunctional relationship, I was always so distilled. Because one of the things that a dysfunctional relationship forces you to do, it forces you to not tell the truth, to disguise the truth. Don't say the full truth. Give only a little bit of the story so that you can use that as a loophole to say, I told you. Yeah, I told you. Right? That's one of the things that like completely crushed me on a daily basis. When I knew the truth and I knew the other person wasn't quite being fully honest about what's really, really going on. And it's only when he get caught, then he would say, but I told you. In the meantime, he didn't really tell you, just sort of mention in passing that maybe this guy or that girl or whatever the situation. And then you would say, yeah, I remember slightly having that conversation, but it really wasn't the full story. But that was his way of getting past your blockage, right? Yes. My mom would say, work for what you have. Work hard for what you have. And do not envy anybody of what they have. Because you don't know what they had to do and who they had to become in order to have what they have. You work hard for what you want. So that reminded me of how my mother built the home that I grew up in. She didn't have the money, a lot of money. But whenever my father puts money on the table, she would always put aside a little bit for the house that we are going to build. And then she started to visit the hardware store and would start purchasing brick by brick by brick. I remember going to the hardware store, all her kids who was old enough to carry something, and we had a brick on our head going home with the brick. By the time my mother finally accumulated enough money and enough bricks to build a house, to start construction, the first set of bricks had moss on it. That's how she got what she wanted. She sacrificed and she worked hard and she built a whole house. And according to the standards of the community we grew up in, she was a wealthy woman. It wasn't always that way, but that's how she was perceived. Because not only did she build financial wealth, she never borrowed a dime. She would say, if I have to use a credit card, that means I can't afford it. See? If she had to borrow money to get something, that in her head meant she can't afford it. And that in and of itself influenced me. And I often wonder if through the years I've had opportunities that passed me by because at the moment in time I couldn't afford it, you know? But anyway, that's for another story. She would say, be willing to fail. So even though you know what you're trying has a lot of obstacles, she would say that's no reason not to try it. That's definitely from my mother. And she would say to her daughters, respect yourself. Respect yourself to fight for what you say you are, to stand in integrity of who you profess to be. In other words, you don't need anybody else's approval to give you a stamp to say this is who and what you are. That comes from inside here. That comes from you, right? She would say, take accountability. Take accountability. One of her, most of what she believed and most of what she taught me and most of what I practice actually worked out to empower me to have a better life, right? But she wasn't always correct. And this is just like two examples, right? My mother believed, she said it over and over and over. In defense of whatever her decisions may or may not have been, especially when it came to family, she would say, well, I leave no stone unturned. And that meant that she neglected evidence. When a situation arises and there was nothing she really could have done, that didn't stop her from trying and trying again. From trying and trying again. But does that sound familiar? If you've been listening to any of my previous lectures, you would see the pattern here. I think, in retrospect, this was one of the areas that I adopted directly from my mother's playbook that didn't support me. I left no stone unturned. But in life, sometimes you need to leave the stone right where you find it. Think about it. It's hard work to literally turn over every stone, knowing that almost every stone that you overturn, you're not going to find what you're looking for, which is a solution to a problem that you face with. That's created by a third party, but that's created by your boyfriend there, right? There comes a time that you need to leave the stone right where it is, accept that there's nothing that you can do except encourage the behavior and walk away and give up and say, yeah, I failed. But her sense of self-empowerment didn't allow her to accept defeat on any given level, right? But coming back to that last point, I want to leave you with this. Yes, I was fortunate enough that I did not have a huge family unit to break up when I had to move on. Because in reality, a lot of us have children, we have bank accounts, we have property, we have commitments, we have in-laws, we have social friends and gatherings, right? And a breakup can be so traumatic, even for me, even though I didn't have a lot of those extended things out of my center there, I still was traumatized. But when I think about it, the trauma that I went through during the separation, during the breakup, is nothing compared to what I would have had to face had I stayed put and just, accepted my default position. I would have lost myself and my soul in trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, as we say. So, although I understand where you might be coming from, I really do. It's time to wake up to your reality that a few more years is not going to make it better. A few more months is not going to make it better. Actually, if you do the math, 2 years of living in a dysfunctional relationship is better than 5. And 5 years is better than 8. And 8 is a lot better than 20. Okay? Do the math. As painful as it is, you get to decide how you're going to move out from here. You get to decide how much more of the dysfunction you need in order to trigger the change, in order to wake up and take back your power. Take back what I call your PumPumPower. Yes, take it back. Take it back. I'll see you on the other side of empowerment. Thank you.